The restaurant at the corner of 5th and Lexington was one of those places that seemed to hum with quiet arrogance. Its name, Le Rêve, glowed faintly in gold above the revolving doors, and behind those doors the scent of money mixed with truffle oil and aged whiskey. Every night, the same ritual repeated itself, men in tailored suits making promises they didn't intend to keep, women in diamonds laughing just loud enough to be heard, and staff who learned long ago to fade into the background. Among those staff members was Clara Hayes, a waitress whose silence had become her most recognizable trait. She moved through the dining room like a shadow, graceful, precise, invisible. Clara didn't speak much, not because she was shy, but because silence had become her armor. She had learned long ago that words, once spoken, could burn worse than fire. Her co-workers had made a game of trying to get her to talk, a $1 bet every shift for whoever could make her say more than 10 words. None of them ever won. She smiled politely, nodded when necessary, and kept her focus on the work. Her voice, when she used it, was quiet but firm, the kind that could cut through noise without needing volume. That night began like any other, orders flying in, wine being poured, laughter bouncing off the marble walls. The air conditioning carried the faint perfume of saffron and cedar. At table 6 sat Elliot Vance, the kind of man people whispered about in Forbes articles. A millionaire by 30, venture capitalist by 32, and self-made by branding himself as the man who never flinched. He was tall, immaculately dressed, his dark hair slicked back, eyes the color of cold steel. Across from him sat a group of investors from Singapore, their laughter sharp and calculated. Clara had served them before. She knew the type, men who liked being served, men who noticed everything except humanity. Elliot didn't notice her at first. To him, she was background noise, another nameless employee gliding through the room with a tray. But when she placed his drink in front of him, her hand didn't tremble. Most waitresses did when they recognized him. She didn't. She didn't even meet his gaze. That alone made him curious. "Excuse me," one of the investors said sharply, snapping his fingers when his glass was half empty. Clara turned, eyes calm, movement steady. "Another round of the Lafroig," he ordered. She nodded once, no words, and vanished into the hum of the restaurant. Elliot's brow arched slightly. There was something unnerving about how quiet she was. Even the other staff, though polite, filled the air with the usual chatter. But not her. She was composed, almost serene, a kind of stillness that didn't belong in a place built on ego and noise. The night stretched on. Conversations blurred into one another, wine glasses clinked, forks scraped porcelain plates. It was a symphony of luxury, until the first faint smell of smoke drifted through the kitchen doors. At first, no one noticed. A sous-chef cursed softly, fanning away steam from an overcooked reduction. The maitre d' barked orders about pacing courses. But then a thin ribbon of gray began curling along the ceiling lights, almost delicate in its movement. Clara was the first to see it. Her body stilled mid-step. Her gaze lifted upward. She didn't panic, she simply watched the smoke gather, spreading wider, darker. Someone shouted from the kitchen, a sound half swallowed by laughter from the main dining area. Then came the unmistakable crack of something shattering, glass, maybe, or a pan thrown to the floor. Within seconds, the fire alarms began to wail. Chaos erupted. The symphony of luxury turned into a cacophony of fear. Patrons stumbled over chairs, shouting. The maitre d' yelled instructions no one followed. One of the investors cursed and tried to grab his coat, while another pulled out his phone, filming as if this were entertainment. In the flashing red light, Clara moved. She didn't scream, didn't call out, she simply moved. She crossed the floor like a conductor directing invisible music. Her gestures were sharp, deliberate. She pointed toward the exit for one table, guided another around a collapsing centerpiece, her hand steady on the back of an elderly woman who could barely stand. When a waiter froze near the bar, she locked eyes with him, then silently mouthed, "Go. Now." He obeyed without hesitation. In the chaos, Elliot watched her. He was halfway to the door when he saw her kneel beside a child who had dropped to the floor, coughing. The boy's mother screamed his name, trying to push through the smoke. Clara covered the boy's face with her napkin, lifting him gently. Her eyes watered, but her expression didn't change. Calm. Silent. Determined. She carried him toward the back hallway instead of the main entrance, where the smoke was thickest. Where the hell is she going? Elliot muttered, instinct taking over. He followed. The air was thick, heat rising like a wall. The kitchen was a vision of destruction, flames licking the stainless steel, alarms shrieking, sprinklers sputtering weakly. Clara had wrapped the boy's face in a damp cloth and was leading him through the service corridor. Elliot caught up, shouting over the din. This way. The front. She didn't answer, only shook her head and pointed toward the emergency exit in the back. The door was half blocked by stacked boxes and cleaning supplies. Elliot cursed, moving to pull them aside. Together, without exchanging a single word, they cleared a path. Clara lifted the boy, shielding his head as the door burst open into the cold night air. The rush of oxygen felt electric. Fire trucks were already arriving, lights strobing red against the glass facade of Le Rêve. Clara handed the boy to his mother, who clutched him, sobbing. Elliot turned back to her, but she was already moving toward the building again. Wait, he shouted, grabbing her arm. You can't go back in. She looked at him for the first time, really looked. Her eyes were dark, focused, and utterly unafraid. Then, without a word, she pulled free and went back through the smoke. Something in him snapped. Elliot was used to control, to power. But in that moment, watching her disappear into the inferno, he felt utterly powerless. The fire roared louder, devouring the restaurant's heart. People screamed from the sidewalk. He could see her silhouette for a second, a faint shadow against the light, and then she was gone. Minutes dragged like hours. Firefighters stormed inside, hosing down flames, shouting orders. Elliot paced near the entrance, his chest tight. The investors were gone, whisked away by limousines. The maitre d' was giving statements to police. And then, through the haze, she emerged. Clara stepped out covered in ash, face streaked with soot, eyes glimmering faintly under the streetlights. In her arms, she carried an elderly dishwasher, barely conscious. Paramedics rushed to take him, laying him onto a stretcher. Clara stood still for a moment, breathing hard. Her uniform was torn, her hands blistered, but her expression remained eerily calm. Elliot walked toward her. He didn't know what to say. She glanced up, meeting his eyes briefly, a flicker of recognition, maybe disdain, maybe exhaustion. Then she turned and walked away from the flashing lights. The next morning, her name was everywhere. The silent waitress who saved lives during the blaze at Le Rêve. Headlines flooded the internet. News anchors praised her composure. Commentators romanticized her calm. The city called her a hero, but Clara didn't answer calls, didn't give interviews. She vanished the same way she always lived, quietly. Elliot Vance couldn't let it go. He had spent years surrounded by people who made noise about every minor victory, yet this woman had faced a wall of fire without a single word. He found himself searching her name, scrolling through news comments late into the night. The videos captured fragments, a glimpse of her leading people out, the way she carried the boy. No interviews, no follow-up. Just silence. He couldn't decide what disturbed him more, her bravery, or the fact that she refused the attention that came with it. In his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Elliot poured himself a drink and stared at the reflection in the glass. For a man who had everything, he had never felt such an ache for something he couldn't name. He wanted to understand her, the silence, the composure, the mystery. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was something deeper, something raw. He had seen courage before, but never like that. The next morning, he called his assistant. "Find her," he said simply. "Sir, there's not much to go on. She hasn't spoken to the media." "Then start with the restaurant's employee records. Find anyone who worked that night." "Yes, Mr. Vance." Elliot hung up, leaning back in his chair. He didn't know why he cared. Maybe it was guilt, he had walked out while she had walked back in. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in years, someone had shown him what real strength looked like. Not power, not money, not bravado, but quiet defiance in the face of fear. He didn't know it yet, but finding Clara Hayes would lead him into a story far larger than any business deal he had ever made, a story of loss, redemption, and the kind of silence that speaks louder than fire itself. The fire at Le Rêve was all over the news for days. The footage looped endlessly on TV screens, flames consuming chandeliers, smoke pouring through glass doors, people crying in the street. In every replay, there was one constant, the quiet figure moving through chaos like she had rehearsed it. No words, no hesitation, just that haunting calm. Clara Hayes had saved 17 people that night. 3 of them had been trapped in the service corridor, 2 were elderly guests who would not have made it out without her steady direction. The firefighters told reporters that when they arrived, she was already coordinating others with hand gestures and clear eyes. She didn't even wait for recognition. As soon as the victims were safe, she walked away before they could thank her. The press called her the silent savior of Fifth Avenue. Newspapers published sketches of her face since she refused photographs. Bloggers speculated about her past. Some claimed she was mute, others that she was an ex-soldier, a trauma survivor, or even a disgraced firefighter. Every version made her sound more myth than human. But to Elliot Vance, the millionaire who had watched her disappear into the fire, she was very real, and unforgettably so. 2 days after the incident, he arrived at the temporary offices of the Low Rev management, his presence drawing nervous glances from every employee. He wasn't just any customer, he was a stakeholder, one of the restaurant's private investors. But that wasn't why he was there. "I'm looking for a staff member who was on duty during the fire," he said to the manager, his tone polite but firm. The manager, a balding man with smoke-stained hands, shuffled through papers. "Several, sir. Most of them are, well, recovering from the shock." This one wasn't shocked. She stayed calm. Helped people out. Clara Hayes. The manager's eyes widened slightly. "Ah, yes. Miss Hayes. Quiet woman. Barely spoke a word, but dependable. I tried calling her after the fire to thank her. No answer. She didn't collect her last paycheck either." Elliot leaned forward. "Address on file?" The man hesitated. Elliot's expression hardened just enough to make the decision for him. Within seconds, the manager scribbled something on a scrap of paper and slid it across the table. The address led to a narrow apartment building in the Lower East Side. Paint peeling, mailboxes dented, the kind of place forgotten by the city. He climbed the stairs, the sound of his polished shoes too clean for the dusty hallway. "Apartment 3B. He knocked. No answer. He waited, listening. Then he heard faint movement inside, the creak of a floorboard, a breath held too long. "Miss Hayes," he said quietly. "It's Elliot Vance. From the restaurant." A long pause. Then the lock clicked. The door opened a few inches. Clara stood there, eyes wary. She was dressed simply, a gray sweater, jeans, hair pulled back. Without the restaurant uniform, she looked younger, but her posture carried the same calm precision. "You shouldn't have come here," she said softly. Her voice was lower than he expected. Controlled, but tired. Like she had learned to conserve words the way some people conserve air underwater. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "You saved my life. And the lives of others. You disappeared before I could say anything." Clara shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Vance. I was just doing what anyone should have done." He smiled faintly. "Most people ran. Most people aren't trained not to." The sentence slipped out before she could stop it. Elliot caught it instantly. "Trained? You were a firefighter." She looked away, her silence confirming what her words hadn't. "Not anymore," she said finally. Elliot studied her, noting the faint scars on her wrist, not from that night, but older, healed burns that told their own story. "You lost someone," he said quietly. Her gaze flicked up, surprised by his directness. "Everyone loses someone," she replied. He nodded, accepting the deflection, but he wasn't the kind of man to leave things unsolved. "If you won't accept thanks, at least accept this." He held out a small white envelope. Clara frowned. "What is it?" "A fund donation. You saved a child, an elderly man, 3 employees. This isn't charity, it's gratitude." She stepped back. "Keep it. You don't even know how much it is." "Doesn't matter." He hesitated, then tucked it into her mailbox. "Then at least let me help you rebuild. You could work with our foundation, public safety initiatives, fire response programs. She shook her head sharply. No public anything. No interviews. No cameras. Her tone carried a sudden edge. You don't understand, the last thing I need is attention. Elliot saw something flicker across her face, fear, guilt, or maybe memory. He realized she wasn't just avoiding fame. She was hiding from something. Then tell me what it is you do need, he said softly. Her answer came after a long silence. Peace. And with that, she closed the door. For the next week, Elliot couldn't stop thinking about her. He told himself it was curiosity, not obsession. But when he saw her image on a news broadcast again, a blurry photo, paired with the words "mysterious hero refuses reward," he realized it was more than that. There was something about her composure that unsettled him. In his world, people screamed to be seen. She fought to disappear. He began asking quiet questions. Through contacts in the city records office, he learned that Clara Hayes had once been registered under a different name, Clara Hartley, a former firefighter trainee. Her file was sparse, but a single report caught his attention: warehouse fire, Brooklyn District 17, casualties, 4. He read it twice. The report stated that a rookie trainee had miscommunicated a call for retreat, causing a delay in evacuation. The fire spread faster than expected, trapping the captain and 3 others inside. The trainee had survived with minor burns. Her name had been redacted, but the timeline matched hers perfectly. So that was why she stayed silent. Her voice had once cost lives. Elliot sat back in his chair, the city lights reflecting on the window behind him. The realization hit him with unexpected force. Her calm wasn't courage alone, it was penance. He knew that kind of burden. In business, he had destroyed competitors, crushed rivals, and told himself it was survival. But he had never faced consequences carved into his skin. Clara had. And she carried them quietly. The next day, he went back to her building. He didn't knock this time, he simply waited outside. She appeared around dusk, carrying groceries in one arm, her hair tied back. She stopped short when she saw him. "You're persistent," she said. "I'm curious," he replied. "Curiosity built my entire empire." She sighed, walking past him toward the stairs. "Empires fall, Mr. Vance." He smiled. "Not all of them." She stopped, turning slightly. "Then you haven't lived long enough." He laughed softly. It was the first time she had said more than a sentence to him. He followed her up the steps, careful not to push too hard. "Let me take you to dinner." No cameras. No charity. Just 2 people who survived the same night. She hesitated. He could see the battle behind her eyes, pride against exhaustion, solitude against the small human craving for connection. Finally, she nodded once. One dinner. They met at a small diner 2 blocks from her apartment, the kind of place where no one cared who you were. The waitress recognized Clara instantly and hugged her, ignoring her protests. "You're a hero, honey," she said. "The whole neighborhood's been talking about you." Clara smiled faintly, then slid into a booth. Elliot watched her from across the table, fascinated by how grounded she seemed, like someone who had long accepted that life wasn't fair and learned to live with it anyway. "You don't like praise," he said after a while. "Praise is noise. Noise fades. You sound like a philosopher." "No," she said. "Just someone who's learned that silence keeps you safe." He wanted to ask what she meant, but she changed the subject. "Why are you really here, Mr. Vance? You don't strike me as the type to chase strangers for moral closure." He leaned forward. "You're right. I don't believe in closure. But I believe in truth. And I don't think the world's seen the real version of yours yet." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "The real version doesn't matter. People only believe what makes them feel inspired. They don't want the details, just the headline." Elliot studied her quietly. She was right, of course. His world thrived on illusion, public image, curated stories, polished reputations. But something about her refusal to feed that illusion made him admire her even more. "You saved lives, Clara. That's not illusion. Saving lives doesn't erase losing them," she said quietly. The words hung between them, heavier than the air. Elliot realized she wasn't just carrying memory, she was carrying punishment. A week later, the news shifted. Reports surfaced that Lorev's fire suppression system had failed inspection months earlier. Lawsuits brewed, fingers pointed, investors scrambled. Elliot was called into meetings about liability, insurance, damage control. But his mind kept circling back to Clara. He sent a message through a mutual contact, an old friend in the fire department. Check if she's on their record under any alias. Quietly. Hours later, the friend called back. She was one of ours. Hartley. Resigned after Brooklyn 17. We all thought she left the city. She didn't, Elliot said softly. He looked out the window at the skyline, glowing faintly under the winter haze. Something in him hardened. He couldn't change the past for her, but maybe he could give her a future that wasn't built on guilt. That night, he wrote her a letter instead of calling. Clara. You told me silence keeps you safe. But sometimes silence also keeps us trapped. You have nothing left to prove, you already faced what most people never could. I think it's time someone reminded you that courage doesn't need to whisper. It can speak. If you ever decide to speak again, for yourself, not for anyone else, you'll find I'm listening. Evie. He didn't send it right away. But he knew he would. Because something told him that Clara Hayes' story wasn't finished, and the next fire wouldn't burn buildings. It would burn through the walls she had built around her heart. The letter sat unopened on Clara's kitchen counter for 3 days. She recognized Elliot's handwriting instantly, neat, deliberate, a man used to signing checks that could change lives. She didn't need to read it to know what it contained, pity disguised as admiration. The world always romanticized what it didn't understand. People saw courage in her silence, when in truth, it had been born out of failure. Still, she left the envelope there, as if ignoring it would make it dissolve. By the 4th night, curiosity betrayed her. She sat by the window, city lights reflecting in her glass of water, and read his words slowly. They were gentler than she expected. No demands. No grand promises. Just understanding. And a sentence that clawed at her resolve. Sometimes silence keeps us safe. But sometimes it keeps us trapped. She folded the letter and stared out at the street. A group of firefighters passed by, laughing, one of them spinning his helmet on his finger. She felt that familiar ache, a mixture of nostalgia and guilt. Once, she had laughed like that. Once, she had worn that uniform with pride. The memory came back in fragments, the warehouse blaze, the screams, the smell of burning rubber. The radio in her hand had crackled with static, and through it, her own voice had trembled, all clear, move forward. It had been the wrong call. The roof had collapsed less than a minute later. She closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. 4 lives. 4 funerals. For families who looked at her like she had personally struck the match. She had tried to make amends by re-enlisting, by volunteering, by anything that could dull the guilt, but the department had quietly encouraged her to resign. Too much public attention, too much liability. They had filed it away as human error. But for her, it was an unending sentence. And now, years later, fate had dragged her back into fire again, and into the path of a man who wouldn't let her vanish. Elliot Vance was not used to being ignored. In his world, people returned calls before he made them. His empire had been built on persistence, finding value where others saw none, turning chaos into opportunity. But Clara wasn't an investment, she was an enigma, one that resisted every attempt at understanding. And the more she resisted, the more determined he became. He had his assistant track the repair reports for Lorev's building, the insurance claims, the safety inspections. What he found unsettled him. The fire had started in a service corridor, faulty wiring. But the inspection record showed multiple failed maintenance requests ignored by management. That meant Clara had walked back into the fire not because of fate, but because of someone else's negligence. He met with the chief investigator from the city's fire marshal office, an older man named Donnelly who had seen every kind of tragedy the city could conjure. Donnelly leaned back in his chair, studying Elliot with mild suspicion. "You're not family, not a colleague. Why the interest in this woman?" Elliot hesitated. "She saved my life. I just want to make sure she isn't blamed for something again. Donnelly's expression softened slightly. Again. So you've heard. Brooklyn 17, Elliot said quietly. The man sighed, nodding. Tragic case. Rookie mistake, but not intentional. The department covered it up to protect their image. The girl went through hell. There were rumors she tried to appeal, wanted the official report corrected, said the communication line had interference. They buried it. She quit soon after. Elliot frowned. So she wasn't at fault. Hard to prove. The audio logs were lost. But off the record? I don't think she was. She'd been a model trainee, sharp instincts. The captain trusted her. But you know how it goes, when something burns, someone has to take the blame. He left the office with a knot tightening in his chest. The city had branded Clara as careless. She had branded herself guilty. And no one had ever told her otherwise. He drove through the night to her neighborhood. Rain slicked the streets, neon lights blurring on his windshield. He parked near her building and waited, engine off, watching the windows for any sign of movement. Around midnight, he saw her, a shadow crossing the glass, the soft glow of a lamp behind her. He wanted to go up, to tell her the truth, to say she wasn't to blame. But something stopped him. What if she didn't believe it? Some wounds become identities. Take them away, and the person might crumble. 3 days later, Clara returned to work, not at a restaurant, but at a local community center where she volunteered twice a week. Teaching basic fire safety to schoolchildren had become her quiet form of redemption. She moved through the small classroom, showing them how to check smoke alarms, how to crawl low under smoke, how to use a blanket to extinguish a flame. The children adored her. They didn't see a haunted woman, they saw a calm teacher with gentle eyes. When the class ended, she stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. That's when she saw him. Elliot stood near the gate, hands in his coat pockets. He looked out of place, a man of suits and skyscrapers surrounded by chalk drawings and bicycles. She didn't act surprised. You found me again, she said. You didn't make it hard, he replied. You're trending online again. Someone posted the surveillance footage from that night, you leading people out. It's gone viral. 10 million views in 2 days. Clara exhaled slowly. Wonderful. Another headline. The comments are calling you a hero. Heroes don't need hashtags. He smiled faintly. You really hate attention, don't you? Attention feeds noise. Noise blinds people to truth. And what's the truth, Clara? She looked past him at the children leaving the building. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. The truth is that fire doesn't forgive mistakes. And neither do people. He stepped closer, lowering his tone. But maybe people can be wrong. I talked to the fire marshal's office. I know what happened at Brooklyn 17. The communication line was faulty. It wasn't your fault. Her eyes snapped to his, sharp and disbelieving. You had no right to dig into that. Someone had to. You think uncovering an old report changes anything, she said, voice trembling for the first time. 4 people died, Mr. Vance. 4. Because my voice wasn't clear enough. Because I said the wrong words. Because the radio malfunctioned, he countered. Because the department buried it to protect themselves. You were a scapegoat, Clara. You punished yourself for their mistake. Tears glimmered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Stop. You need to hear this. No. Her voice cracked, echoing down the empty street. For a woman who had lived in silence for so long, even that single shout felt like an earthquake. She turned away, gripping the iron gate until her hands shook. When she spoke again, her tone was soft, broken. Do you know what it's like to hear your own voice in your nightmares? To know it was the last sound 4 men ever heard before they burned? Elliot's chest tightened. He took a step forward but didn't touch her. You can't keep carrying this alone. She let out a bitter laugh. That's the thing about guilt, it doesn't share weight easily. They stood in silence for a long moment. Cars passed, distant sirens wailed. Finally, Clara straightened, her face hardening again. Please leave me alone, Mr. Vance. He wanted to argue, to insist she listen, but he saw in her eyes that pushing further would only deepen the wound. So he nodded. "If you change your mind," he said quietly, "you know where to find me." Then he walked away. That night, Clara dreamed of fire again. But this time, it wasn't the warehouse, it was Le Rêve. The alarm screamed, the smoke rose, and she saw Elliot trapped behind a glass wall, calling her name through the flames. She tried to move, but her feet were rooted in ash. When she woke, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Her heart pounded like fists against a door. She poured herself water, hands trembling. His words replayed in her mind, "You were a scapegoat. You punished yourself for their mistake." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But belief required forgiveness, and forgiveness was a language she had forgotten how to speak. The next morning, she went to the memorial site in Brooklyn. The old warehouse was gone, a supermarket stood in its place, bright and sterile. But near the back corner, someone had planted a small plaque years ago, almost hidden by weeds. In memory of Captain Reed, Miller, Torres, and Shaw. Their courage lives on in the hearts they saved. She knelt, fingers brushing the rusted metal. A single daisy had somehow survived the winter, growing between cracks in the pavement. She placed it by the plaque and whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry." A voice behind her said, "They wouldn't want you to be." She turned sharply. Elliot stood there, holding an umbrella. The rain had begun again, soft and steady. "Are you following me now?" she asked, half angry, half resigned. "No," he said. "Just guessing where you'd go when you finally decided to face it." Clara looked away, her jaw tight. "You think coming here fixes anything?" "No. But maybe it starts something." He handed her a folder. Inside were copies of the official reports, the radio interference logs, statements from other firefighters, even Donnelly's personal note clearing her of negligence. "It wasn't your fault, Clara. You don't have to keep burning for it." She stared at the papers, unable to breathe for a moment. Proof. After all these years, proof. But guilt was not logical, it didn't evaporate under evidence. It had sunk into her bones. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If I let go of this, what am I? I've lived my whole life trying to make up for them. Every shift, every quiet act, it's all I have left of them." Elliot's voice softened. "Maybe it's time you lived for them instead of because of them." The words landed like rain on fire. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Tears slipped down her cheeks, mixing with the rain. He stepped closer, lifting the umbrella slightly over her head. They stood there in silence, two people bound by different kinds of ghosts. Finally, she said, "Why are you doing this, Elliot?" "Because you showed me what real courage looks like," he said simply. "And I can't forget it." She looked up at him, eyes glimmering. "Courage isn't silence. It's surviving it." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe you're the bravest person I've ever met." For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet recognition, fragile but real. Then she turned back to the plaque. Her reflection blurred in the wet metal, but for the first time, she didn't look away. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I don't know how to start over." "You already did," he said. "The night you walked back into that fire." In the weeks that followed, Clara began to change in small ways. She still avoided reporters, but she stopped hiding from the world. She accepted a teaching position at the local fire academy, training recruits on crisis management, using her experience as both warning and wisdom. The students respected her deeply. She didn't speak often, but when she did, every word carried weight. Elliot attended her first lecture, sitting quietly in the back. When she caught his eye, he just nodded, a silent acknowledgement that she had finally found her voice again, even if it didn't sound like anyone else's. Outside the academy, the city moved on. The investigation into Le Rêve's fire exposed corruption, faulty systems, negligence. The restaurant's owners were fined heavily, its reputation ruined. But one thing remained untarnished, the legend of the silent waitress who had saved 17 lives. And for the first time, Clara didn't flinch when she heard her name spoken with reverence. She still kept Elliot's letter on her table, folded neatly beside the fire report. Some nights she read it again, tracing the words with her fingertips. Other nights, she simply stared out the window at the city lights and listened to the hum of life below, the same city that had once burned her now holding her gently in its glow. And though she still preferred silence, she had learned one simple truth: silence, when chosen, was strength. But silence born from guilt was just another kind of fire, and she had finally learned how to put it out. Winter receded slowly that year, dragging its gray clouds behind it like tattered curtains. The city thawed, but Clara Hayes didn't. The chill had lived in her for years, settled deep under her ribs where no sunlight could reach. Still, she showed up every morning to the Fire Academy, coffee in hand, hair pulled into the same tight knot, and eyes sharp as flint. It had been months since the fire at Le Rêve. The noise had faded, headlines replaced by newer scandals. Yet, somehow, the legend of the silent waitress endured. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of herself in online articles or motivational reels, her image flattened into a symbol she didn't recognize. To the world, she was a parable. To herself, she was still just a woman learning how to breathe without guilt. The academy classroom smelled faintly of ash and chalk. Recruits sat in rows, watching her demonstrate crisis procedure. Fire doesn't care who you are, she told them, voice calm, steady. It only cares how fast you think when fear tries to take over. She paused, letting that sink in. A few of the younger trainees scribbled notes. One girl in the front raised her hand. "Ma'am, were you really in the Le Rêve fire?" Clara hesitated. Even now, the word fire felt like a bruise being pressed. "Yes," she said finally. "But that night isn't what made me who I am. It's what came after." "What came after?" another trainee asked. Clara offered a small smile. Silence. After class, she stood by the training grounds, watching new recruits run drills under the rising sun. Their laughter carried across the asphalt. It reminded her of something Elliot had said weeks ago at the memorial: maybe it's time you lived for them instead of because of them. She wanted to believe that was possible. She wanted to believe she could live again, not just survive. Elliot had kept his distance since that day. He sent occasional texts, simple messages like "hope training's going well" or "found a book you might like about crisis psychology." She replied rarely, but never ignored him completely. The distance felt safe, like the quiet between heartbeats. But one evening in March, he called unexpectedly. "Clara," he said, his voice low, hesitant. "I need a favor." "From me?" she asked. "That's a first." He chuckled softly. "I'm hosting a charity gala next week. Fundraiser for emergency response foundations. Half the attendees are donors who wouldn't know courage if it hit them in the face, but their money helps. I want you to come." She frowned. "As what?" "A token of inspiration." "As a guest," he said. "No speeches. No cameras. Just, come." She hesitated. Crowds made her skin crawl, and the thought of standing in a room full of wealthy patrons pretending to care about the tragedies of others made her stomach twist. But there was sincerity in his voice, a tone she couldn't quite refuse. "I'll think about it," she said. "Good," he replied. "Because I already reserved you a seat." The gala was held at the newly rebuilt Le Rêve, ironic, almost cruel. The restaurant had risen from ashes like a phoenix, glossier and grander, but its beauty felt hollow. Clara arrived in a simple black dress, the kind that didn't invite attention but couldn't avoid it either. Her hair was loose for once, and the scar on her wrist gleamed faintly under the chandelier light. Elliot found her near the back, where she stood half hidden by a marble column. He smiled when he saw her. "You came." "Apparently, I did," she said dryly. Still trying to figure out why. "Because you're brave enough to face ghosts," he said. She arched a brow. "Or foolish enough." He laughed, offering her a glass of sparkling water. "Then cheers to foolish bravery." As the night went on, Clara observed from a quiet corner. She watched as politicians, donors, and celebrities floated through conversations about bravery and sacrifice, their words rehearsed, their empathy performative. Yet, beneath all the posturing, she noticed something genuine in Elliot. He wasn't selling himself tonight. He was raising money for survivors, for training programs, for better equipment. She realized he wasn't just rich, he was restless, trying to fill some void he couldn't name. At one point, the lights dimmed. A short video played, a montage of fire rescues, emergency responders, and rebuilding efforts. Clara tried to stay detached, but when a photo of her carrying the boy from Le Rêve flashed across the screen, her breath hitched. The crowd applauded. Some stood. Cameras turned. She froze. Elliot stepped forward, clearly startled. I swear I didn't know they'd include that, he whispered. I can stop it. No, she said softly, eyes fixed on the screen. Let them see. The applause faded into speeches, then laughter, then music. As people drifted toward the dance floor, Clara excused herself, stepping outside for air. The night was cool, crisp. She could still smell faint traces of smoke from the building's restored wood. It was beautiful, yes, but beauty built on ruin never quite lost the scent of what it used to be. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The silence felt heavy again, pressing down on her chest. Then she heard it, the faintest pop, followed by the sharp crackle of electricity. Her eyes snapped open. A small spark flared along the edge of a decorative light fixture above the door. At first, she thought it was a trick of her mind. Then smoke began curling from the wires. Inside, the music drowned out everything. Clara didn't think. She moved. It started fast, a short circuit that jumped to the drapes, then spread to the decorative panels. In seconds, flames licked the ceiling. The crowd noticed too late. Panic erupted, echoing the chaos from months ago. But this time, Clara wasn't invisible. She grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and burst through the doors, shouting, "Everyone! Move to the exits!" Her voice cut through the confusion, the first time many had ever heard her speak. Elliot turned, eyes widening. "Clara," he shouted. "Over here." But she was already moving through the smoke, guiding guests toward the nearest exit. The fire alarm screamed to life. The sprinklers hissed but faltered, faulty pressure again. Of course. She felt the heat rising against her skin, the same cruel déjà vu. A woman stumbled near the bar, coughing violently. Clara dropped beside her, pulling a cloth over her mouth. "Breathe slow. Stay low." The woman nodded, eyes wide. She turned, searching for more trapped guests. Across the room, she saw a young waiter pinned under a fallen beam. Without hesitation, she sprinted through the flames. Elliot followed, grabbing a jacket to cover his face. "Clara! Wait," he shouted. The beam was heavy, too heavy for her alone. Elliot joined her, muscles straining as they lifted it just enough for the boy to crawl out. The kid bolted toward the door, coughing. Elliot turned to her, eyes burning. "You said no more fires." Clara looked back at the spreading blaze, her face streaked with sweat and soot. Seems fire didn't get the memo. The heat intensified. The upper floors began to creak. A chandelier crashed nearby, sending sparks across the marble. They ducked instinctively. Clara glanced toward the far end of the hall, a small child crying, separated from his mother. The woman screamed his name from the doorway. "Elliot!" Clara called. "Get them out. All of them." He grabbed her arm. "Clara, don't." Her eyes were fierce, unyielding. "I have to." He knew that look. He'd seen it the first night, when she walked into the flames without hesitation. He also knew he couldn't stop her. "Be careful," he said. "Always," she replied, though they both knew she wasn't. She ran. The smoke thickened, blinding. Her throat burned, her lungs screaming for air. But she kept going, crawling low, listening for the child's cries. She found him hiding under a table, trembling. "Hey," she said gently, pulling him close. "We're going to get out. You're safe, okay?" He nodded, sobbing. As she carried him toward the door, part of the ceiling gave way. Flames burst downward. She shielded the boy with her body, rolling across the floor. A beam grazed her shoulder, pain exploded, sharp and deep, but she didn't stop. She crawled forward, dragging them both until light broke through the smoke. Elliot appeared, reaching out. "Clara. Here." She staggered to her feet, clutching the child. He grabbed them both, pulling them out into the cold night. The crowd erupted in gasps as she collapsed on the pavement, coughing hard. Paramedics rushed forward, taking the boy, then turning to her. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Clara shook her head weakly. "Check him first." Elliot knelt beside her, his suit singed, his hands shaking. "You did it again," he whispered. "You saved them." She coughed, her voice hoarse. "Habit, I guess." The paramedics insisted she go to the hospital. She refused, as always. But this time, Elliot didn't take no for an answer. At the hospital, under harsh fluorescent lights, Clara lay with an oxygen mask pressed to her face. The doctor said she had mild smoke inhalation and a dislocated shoulder. Nothing fatal, but enough to keep her still for once. Elliot sat beside her bed, exhaustion lining his features. "You realize you just relived your worst nightmare," he said quietly. "And won." She removed the mask, her voice rough. "You think I won?" A building burned again. People panicked again. I just happened to be standing there. He leaned forward. "No. You faced what destroyed you, and this time, you commanded it. You spoke, Clara. You led." She looked away. "I didn't think. I just reacted." "Exactly. You didn't think, you trusted yourself. That's what makes it different." The silence stretched between them, heavy but warm. She finally said, "I didn't even realize I shouted." The words just came out. Elliot smiled faintly. "They saved lives." She let out a small laugh, the sound foreign to her own ears. "Guess I broke my vow of silence." "About time," he said softly. News spread quickly. Another fire at rebuilt Le Rêve, same woman saves dozens again. This time, there was no mystery, no disappearance. Reporters swarmed the hospital, but Clara refused interviews. Still, the footage spoke for itself, the woman who had once been known for her silence now yelling commands, guiding others to safety. It was everywhere within hours. And for the first time, Clara didn't cringe when she saw her own image on the screen. Instead, she felt something else, peace. A week later, Elliot visited her at the academy. She had returned sooner than anyone expected, arm still in a sling. He found her standing in front of a class, her voice stronger, steadier than ever. "When fear comes," she told the recruits, "you don't silence it. You use it. You let it sharpen you." After class, she walked with him down the hallway. The light slanted through the windows, casting gold over the walls. "You shouldn't be here," she said with a smile. "You have a company to run." He shrugged. "They can survive without me for one day." "I doubt that." He stopped walking. "Clara, I need to tell you something." She looked up. "What is it?" He hesitated. "That night, you made me see things differently. All the wealth, the power, the noise, I thought that was strength. But it's not. Strength is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. That's what you've been doing your whole life." She smiled faintly. "And you? What are you going to do with that realization?" He took a breath. "I want to build something in your name. A foundation for trauma recovery, especially for first responders. Training, therapy, community. You wouldn't have to speak if you didn't want to, but it would carry your story." Clara's expression softened. "You don't owe me that, Elliot." He shook his head. "I don't owe you. I believe in you." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The silence between them was the kind she had once feared, but now, it felt sacred. Finally, she said, "If we do this, it's not about me. It's for them, the ones who didn't make it." He nodded. "For them." The foundation launched 6 months later drew national attention. Cameras flashed, reporters buzzed, and banners with the words Phoenix Initiative hung across the hall. Elliot gave the opening speech, talking about resilience, about how courage can be quiet but world-changing. Then he paused, turning toward the woman standing beside him. "Clara Hayes," he said, "taught me that silence can hold more strength than noise. But sometimes, even the quietest voice can save the world." The audience stood, applauding. Clara stepped forward, uncertain, then faced the crowd. For a long moment, she said nothing, just scanned the faces, the cameras, the light. Then she took the microphone. "I've spent years believing that my voice didn't deserve to be heard," she began softly. "I was wrong. Our voices don't need to be perfect, they just need to be honest." She looked at Elliot, who smiled encouragingly. "I was afraid of speaking because I thought my words could destroy lives. But silence almost did the same. Tonight, I speak for everyone who's ever carried guilt in silence. You are not your mistakes. You are what you do after them." The room erupted in applause, but Clara didn't hear it. Her heart pounded too loudly. She stepped back from the microphone, exhaling slowly. For the first time in years, she felt light. Later, as the crowd dispersed, she stood by the balcony overlooking the city. Elliot joined her quietly. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied, watching the skyline. "We did." He smiled. "You know, I think I preferred you when you didn't talk as much." She laughed, a real laugh this time. "Careful, or I'll start giving speeches." "Promise?" She turned to him, eyes glimmering. "Maybe." The city lights stretched endlessly below them, a sea of gold and silver. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed, not a warning, but a song of life continuing. Clara closed her eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time, the silence around her didn't feel like a prison. It felt like peace. She had faced the fire, twice, and walked out carrying something she thought she'd lost forever. Her voice. The months following the Phoenix Initiative's launch changed everything. The story of Clara Hayes, the woman who survived 2 fires, saved dozens, and found her voice again, had spread far beyond New York. She had become more than a survivor, she was a symbol of endurance, of rebirth, of quiet power. Schools told her story. News outlets replayed her speeches. Documentaries quoted her words, "You are not your mistakes. You are what you do after them." Yet, beneath the media's fascination, Clara remained grounded. She still lived in the same small apartment, still brewed her own coffee each morning, still took the subway to the academy. Fame had never been her goal. Redemption had. But as her story grew, so did the weight of responsibility. Every survivor who wrote to her, every child who said she inspired them, it all reminded her of what that voice cost to reclaim. She sometimes stood at the foundation's office window, watching the city pulse below. Elliot would find her there often, quiet as always. "You know," he said one afternoon, handing her a folder, "you don't have to keep working this hard. The board can handle more of it now." She looked at him over her shoulder. "And miss out on the chaos?" He smiled. "Chaos seems to follow you anyway." She gave a small laugh. "Maybe it's testing if I've learned my lesson." The Phoenix Initiative grew faster than either of them imagined. It opened training centers in 3 states, offered scholarships to young firefighters, and partnered with trauma counselors for first responders. Donations poured in. But the real change came from the people, those who found strength in her story. Letters arrived daily. Survivors of car accidents, floods, and fires, all saying the same thing, "Your silence gave us courage to speak." Elliot once joked that they needed an entire department just to handle her fan mail. But beneath his humor was admiration. He had seen heroes before, military, political, corporate, but Clara was different. She had never asked to be one, and that was exactly why people trusted her. Still, not everyone did. A few critics called her a fraud, a media creation. Some dug up the old Brooklyn 17 file, twisting facts to suggest the city had whitewashed her past. Others questioned the Phoenix Initiative's finances, implying that Elliot's involvement was a vanity project. The noise returned, the very thing Clara feared most. At first, she ignored it. Then came the investigative piece on a national network, The Silent Savior, Hero or Hoax. It rehashed her past mistakes, hinted at cover-ups, and claimed her new foundation was built on survivors' guilt. Elliot watched the broadcast from his office, jaw tight. "They're vultures," he muttered. He called his PR team, ready to fight back. But Clara stopped him. "Let them talk," she said calmly. "I've learned you can't control every fire. Some have to burn themselves out." He looked at her, troubled. "You're not angry?" She shook her head. "I'm tired. And I won't let them drag me back into the ashes." A week later, Clara was invited to speak at a national safety summit in Chicago. The theme, the human side of heroism. At first, she hesitated. Crowds still unnerved her. But she also knew that silence, this time, would feel like surrender. She agreed. The auditorium was massive, over 3,000 people. Cameras lined the aisles. As she waited backstage, her palms damp, she heard the host introducing her. "Please welcome the woman whose courage reignited hope for thousands across America, Ms. Clara Hayes." The applause thundered. She stepped into the light. Her voice trembled at first. "I never thought I'd stand here," she began. "There was a time I couldn't even stand in front of a mirror without hearing screams." The room fell silent. "I used to believe silence kept me safe. But it only kept me small. It took walking through fire, twice, to realize that strength isn't about what you endure quietly. It's about what you rise to say after the flames die." She paused, scanning the crowd. "We all face fires. Some burn buildings. Some burn inside us. Either way, we have a choice: hide from the smoke or breathe through it." When she finished, the audience stood again. Not with pity, but with reverence. She walked off stage, heart pounding, but lighter than ever before. Elliot was waiting in the wings, grinning. "You just burned the house down, in a good way." She rolled her eyes. "Don't ever use that phrase again." He laughed. "Fair enough. For a while, things were good. Too good, perhaps. Then came the call. It was late autumn when the first reports hit the news: massive wildfire spreading through Northern California. Dozens missing. The footage was haunting: mountain towns swallowed by smoke, red skies flickering with embers. The Phoenix Initiative immediately mobilized volunteers. Clara coordinated logistics from New York, working around the clock. But when a team leader called, voice shaking, everything changed. "We've lost communication with Engine 27, he said. They were evacuating residents from Ridgeview Canyon. Last GPS ping was near the old mining road. We think they're trapped." Clara froze. She knew that tone too well. "How long ago?" she asked. 40 minutes. She didn't hesitate. "I'm coming." "Clara, you don't have to." "I do." Elliot protested when she told him. "You've done enough," he said. "You don't need to go into another fire." "This isn't about me," she replied. "Those are my people." He tried again. "At least wait for a full crew." "I can't. They might not have time." There was no convincing her. She left that night on the next flight out. The air in California was thick with smoke when she arrived. Helicopters roared overhead. Ash fell like snow. The base camp was chaos: rows of exhausted firefighters, injured civilians, and emergency tents. She met the incident commander, a stern woman named Chief Morales, who recognized her instantly. "Clara Hayes," Morales said, shaking her hand. "Didn't expect to see you in the field again." "I didn't either," Clara replied. "What's the situation?" Morales pointed to a large digital map. "Ridgeview Canyon's a nightmare. Narrow roads, no visibility. Engine 27 went radio silent near here." She tapped a blinking red marker. "We've got aerial eyes, but no ground team close enough yet. Winds shifting south, it's going to trap them completely if we don't move soon." Clara studied the map. "There's an old service tunnel under the ridge, used to be a mining path. If we can get through there, we might reach them faster." Morales blinked. "That's suicidal. It's probably collapsed." "Probably isn't definitely," Clara said. "Send me with a small team. 3, max." The chief hesitated, then nodded. "You've got 1 hour." They entered the canyon at dusk. The fire glowed ahead like the mouth of a furnace. Clara led the way with a thermal scanner, 2 young firefighters behind her. The tunnel was exactly where she remembered from old blueprints: half-buried, narrow, and suffocating. They crawled through debris, coughing, until the sound of faint voices reached them. "Help! Over here!" It was Engine 27. 4 firefighters, 1 unconscious. Their truck had overturned after a rockslide. Flames surrounded the area, creeping closer. Clara's heart hammered. "We've got you," she said. "Stay low." They worked quickly, cutting the seatbelt, dragging the injured man out. One of the younger rescuers panicked when sparks rained down. "We're not gonna make it," he cried. Clara grabbed his arm. "Look at me," she said, firm. "You will make it. Focus on the light ahead." The words felt familiar, echoes of what she once wished someone had told her. They moved, inch by inch, through the collapsing tunnel, the air growing hotter, oxygen thinning. Every muscle screamed, but she refused to stop. Finally, daylight. They stumbled out onto the rocky ledge, gasping. Helicopter blades thudded above, rescue. Clara waved a flare, signaling the team. One by one, they were lifted out. She went last, watching as the canyon below roared like an ocean of flame. When they touched down at base camp, cheers erupted. Morales hugged her fiercely. "You're insane," she said. "But damn if you aren't brilliant." Clara just smiled, exhausted. "Tell that to my lungs." Elliot arrived the next morning, having flown overnight. When he saw her, soot-streaked, coughing but alive, he nearly broke down. "I thought I'd lost you," he said hoarsely. "You'd have to try harder," she whispered, grinning weakly. He laughed through his tears. "You never change." She tilted her head. "That's not true. I just stopped running from who I am." News of the Ridgeview rescue exploded worldwide. Photos of Clara leading the survivors through smoke became iconic. Journalists called it the redemption blaze. Social media crowned her the phoenix of Ridgeview. But this time, Clara didn't hide. She faced the cameras, not for fame, but to direct attention to the real heroes. "These men and women risk their lives daily," she said at the press briefing. "If I've learned anything, it's that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being afraid and still stepping forward." The applause was thunderous. That night, when things finally quieted, she and Elliot sat outside the camp, watching the smoldering horizon. The wind smelled of soot and pine. Stars flickered faintly above the haze. "You realize," he said softly, "you just closed the circle." She smiled. "Maybe. But fires never really end, do they? They just change form." He nodded. "So what now?" Clara thought for a long moment. "Now. I rest. For once, I think I've earned it." Months later, back in New York, the Phoenix Initiative unveiled its newest program, the Hayes Fellowship for Firefighter Wellness. It focused on mental health, stress recovery, and family support. Clara gave the keynote address, but it wasn't a speech of grand drama. It was simple, human. "When I lost my voice, I thought I'd lost myself," she told the audience. "But silence taught me to listen, to the fear, to the grief, to others. Every voice matters, even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones." Afterward, she stood beside Elliot on the balcony, the city lights sprawling below. "You've changed a lot of lives," he said. "So have you," she replied. "You gave me a reason to start again." He smiled. "You gave me one to believe again." They stood there in comfortable silence. Somewhere far below, sirens wailed faintly, reminders of a city still burning, still living, still healing. Clara watched the horizon and felt no fear, no guilt, just calm. Years later, people would still tell her story. Not as a tragedy, but as a testament. Schools named programs after her. Fire academies quoted her teachings. Survivors wrote books inspired by her journey. And every time someone asked how she kept going, she would smile and say, "Because silence can't bury a soul that's already walked through fire." In her apartment, on a quiet evening years later, she would sit by the window, sipping tea, the city humming below. On the table beside her, a photo, her and Elliot, standing before the Phoenix Initiative sign, laughing. Next to it, the small plaque from the Brooklyn Memorial, the one she had cleaned and kept all these years. She touched it gently. "For them," she whispered. Outside, the sky was streaked with orange, a sunset that looked almost like flame, but this time, it didn't scare her. It reminded her she had survived. And this time, she didn't stay silent. Epilogue, years later. 10 years after the Ridgeview fire, a young recruit stood at the memorial wall of the Phoenix Training Academy. Her name was Maya Torres, the granddaughter of one of the men lost in Brooklyn 17. She placed a hand on the engraved plaque and whispered, "Thank you, Captain Reed. Thank you, Clara Hayes." Behind her, a portrait hung, Clara in uniform, smiling faintly. Below it, her quote etched in bronze. "You are not your mistakes. You are what you do after them." Elliot Vance, now gray at the temples, walked into the hall with quiet reverence. He paused before the portrait, eyes soft. She'd have hated this much attention, he murmured. Maya smiled. Then we're honoring her perfectly. They shared a quiet laugh. Outside, the academy's siren rang, training drills beginning for a new generation. The sound echoed through the air, strong and steady. And somewhere, in that sound, was Clara's voice, no longer trembling, no longer burdened, but alive in every soul she had touched. Her silence had once been a wound. Now, it was a legacy. It had been 15 years since the night at Ridgeview Canyon, and the world had changed in ways Clara Hayes could barely recognize. The city skyline was taller now, its glass towers gleaming like sharpened promises. Technology had turned the world faster, louder, and somehow more fragile. Yet one constant remained, the Phoenix Initiative, now a worldwide network of rescue training, trauma recovery, and survivor advocacy programs. The foundation had become her life's greatest achievement, not for its fame, but for the lives it quietly rebuilt. Clara was older now. Her hair, streaked with silver, framed a face carved by wisdom more than time. The faint burn scars along her wrist still glimmered when the light hit them, old reminders, not of pain, but of purpose. She had retired from field work 5 years ago, handing leadership to younger, sharper minds. Still, she remained the heart of it all, the woman who had faced fire and turned silence into strength. Elliot Vance, her steadfast companion through those decades, now walked with a cane but carried the same warm mischief in his eyes. The business world called him a legend, yet he often joked that his proudest investment wasn't his company, it was her. Together, they had seen nations honor firefighters, seen survivors find their voices, and seen a movement rise from one woman's ashes. But on this particular morning, as sunlight streamed across her small Manhattan apartment, Clara felt a tug, a whisper of restlessness she hadn't felt in years. Her phone buzzed. A message from Maya Torres. Dr. Hayes, are you coming to the Academy's memorial today? I'd really love you to speak, even just a few words. Clara smiled at the title. Dr. Hayes. She still wasn't used to it. The honorary doctorate had come years ago, after the release of her book Walking Through Fire. It had taken Elliot 2 years to convince her to publish it, half memoir, half manifesto. It became a bestseller within weeks. But her fame had never sat comfortably. She preferred being the quiet mentor in the back of the room, the one who spoke only when it mattered. She typed back. I'll be there. Don't start without me. She slipped on her black coat, the same one she'd worn for the Phoenix Initiative's opening night all those years ago. Its fabric was worn at the edges, but familiar. Comforting. She still walked with the grace of a woman used to stepping through danger, her silence never meek, only measured. The memorial hall at the Fire Academy stood tall against the morning sky. Banners of red and gold fluttered gently in the spring breeze. Inside, hundreds gathered, firefighters, survivors, trainees, and families. A sea of uniforms, medals, and humble pride. Maya Torres, now in her 30s, stood at the podium. She had grown into her role as the youngest academy commander in the state. Her presence was commanding yet kind, her voice the perfect blend of discipline and compassion. When she spotted Clara entering the hall, her eyes lit up. She's here, Maya whispered to the aide beside her. Start the tribute. The lights dimmed, and a video began to play on the massive screen, archival footage spanning decades. The first clip was grainy black and white, the fire at Low Rev. Then came the interviews, the Ridgeview rescue, the Phoenix Initiative's founding, and a montage of Clara training recruits. Over the footage, her own voice played softly from an old interview. You don't need to be fearless to be brave. You just need to decide that fear won't have the last word. The crowd stood in silent reverence. When the video ended, Maya stepped to the mic. Dr. Clara Hayes is not just a name etched in history. She is the reason most of us are here, not just to learn how to fight fire, but to understand what it means to rise after it. Today, on the 15th anniversary of Ridgeview, we honor her with the highest civilian service medal ever awarded to a firefighter in this country. Applause thundered. Clara's chest tightened, not from pride, but disbelief. She had never done any of it for medals. Still, she walked to the stage, calm and poised, as Maya pinned the medal over her heart. Thank you, Clara said softly into the microphone. But this doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone who ever walked back into the flames, literal or otherwise, and came out carrying someone else. The hall erupted again. Yet amidst the celebration, Clara's eyes drifted toward the exit doors. Something about the breeze through the open hall felt uneasy. Her instincts, those old, buried reflexes, stirred again. She didn't know why until the alarms began to wail. The siren wasn't part of the ceremony. Maya's hand flew to her earpiece. "Report," she demanded. A cadet's panicked voice crackled through. "Ma'am, there's been an explosion in the East Wing. A gas leak, flames spreading fast." The crowd erupted into chaos. Clara's body moved before her mind caught up. She was already heading for the corridor when Maya tried to grab her arm. "Dr. Hayes, you can't." Clara turned, that familiar steel flashing in her eyes. "I've spent a lifetime teaching them how to run into fire. I'm not about to stand here and watch them do it alone." Maya hesitated, then nodded. "I'm coming with you." Together, they sprinted through the corridors as smoke began to pour from the East Wing. The heat hit them like a wall, thick, suffocating. Clara covered her mouth with a sleeve, eyes scanning for movement. The fire had started in the boiler room, spreading fast through the ventilation. "Evacuate the lower levels." Clara shouted to the nearest crew. "Cut power to the south grid." Her voice carried command, not panic. For a moment, time folded backward. She was back in that first fire again, but this time, she wasn't frozen by guilt. She was the storm itself. Maya coughed through her mask. "We've got trapped civilians in the training wing." Clara nodded. "Then we go." They pushed through smoke, navigating blind turns until they reached the wing. Through the haze, they saw two maintenance workers cornered by flames. One was injured, pinned under debris. The other screamed for help. Clara dropped to her knees beside the trapped man. The heat was unbearable, her lungs burning with every breath. "We'll get you out," she promised. Maya tried lifting the beam but winced. "Too heavy." Clara's eyes darted around. "Hydraulic jack, in the storage room." Maya ran, returning seconds later with the tool. Together, they leveraged it beneath the beam. The metal groaned, then lifted just enough for Clara to pull the man free. "Go," she ordered. "Take him out." Maya hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll follow. There are still others deeper in." Maya wanted to argue but knew better. "Don't you dare die on me," she said. Clara smiled faintly. "Not my style." The flames roared like a living thing now, swallowing everything in its path. Clara moved through the smoke, searching for survivors. Her vision blurred, her throat raw, but she kept moving. She could hear the ceiling groan, seconds before collapse. She found one last cadet unconscious near the stairwell. Grabbing him under the arms, she dragged him toward the exit, inch by inch. The ceiling gave way just as they reached the door. A blast of heat threw her forward. Pain shot through her leg, something heavy had struck her. She cried out but kept dragging the boy until hands grabbed them both from outside. "Got her," someone shouted. "She's out." The world blurred, sirens, shouts, cold air against burning skin. Clara blinked up at the gray sky. Maya's face appeared above her, streaked with soot and tears. "You're insane," she whispered. "You saved him." Clara coughed, voice rasping. "That's what we do." Medics swarmed. She was lifted onto a stretcher, oxygen mask pressed to her face. As they rolled her toward the ambulances, the building behind them groaned, and then, like a sigh, collapsed inward. The East Wing was gone. Clara awoke in a hospital room 2 days later. The rhythmic beep of monitors greeted her. Her right leg was bandaged, ribs bruised, but she was alive. Maya sat beside the bed, exhaustion etched into her face. "How bad?" Clara asked. "Third-degree burns on your leg, but nothing life-threatening," Maya said. "The cadet made it. So did the workers. No casualties. Because of you." Clara exhaled. Relief and fatigue washed over her like waves. "How's the academy?" "Damaged, but not destroyed," Maya said. Then, softer, "You shouldn't have gone in there." Clara smiled faintly. "I've been saying that for 40 years. Elliot entered then, leaning on his cane. His expression was a storm of anger and admiration. "You just can't retire properly, can you?" "I tried," she croaked. "Didn't stick." He sat beside her, taking her hand gently. "You scared us all." "I scare myself sometimes," she said, smiling weakly. The fire had reignited public attention around her legacy. Reporters flooded the hospital lawn, calling it Hayes's last fire. Donations to the Phoenix Initiative skyrocketed overnight. But inside that quiet room, none of it mattered. Clara's body was tired, but her spirit burned steady. Days passed. She healed slowly. Maya visited daily, bringing updates from the Academy's rebuilding efforts. Elliot stayed most nights, reading to her from her own book, something she always found amusing. Chapter 12, he read one evening. "You wrote, sometimes, redemption isn't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet act of standing up again." He looked at her over the page. "Seems prophetic." Clara chuckled softly. "I was always stubborn that way." He closed the book. "What happens when you finally can't stand up again?" She turned her gaze toward the window. The city beyond shimmered with twilight. "Then someone else will. That's the whole point." Spring returned, bringing renewal. Clara's recovery was slow but sure. She began physical therapy, walking again with effort and grace. Maya insisted on installing an engraved plaque at the Academy's new East Wing. Dedicated to Dr. Clara Hayes, who taught us that even in silence, courage speaks. Clara protested, of course, but Maya refused to back down. The day the plaque was unveiled, the entire Academy stood in salute. Clara gave a short speech, leaning slightly on her cane. "I've walked through fire more times than I care to count," she said. "Each time, I thought it would be my last. But fire isn't the enemy. It's the test. It asks only one question: will you rise again?" The cadets erupted in applause. Years continued to unfold. Elliot passed peacefully one winter night, his hand still holding hers. The world mourned him as a titan of industry. Clara mourned him as the man who had seen her when she couldn't see herself. His foundation endowment secured the Phoenix Initiative's future for generations. In his final letter, he had written, "If I had one wish, it's that you keep speaking. The world still needs your voice, Clara, even if only in whispers." She honored that wish. In her final decade, she became a mentor full-time, traveling to schools and small towns, teaching courage the way she once taught survival. She never used notes. She never raised her voice. Yet every word landed like truth carved in stone. And when the time finally came, years later, in the warmth of an early spring afternoon, Clara sat by her window, the same window where she had once watched storms rage over the city. Her body was frail now, but her eyes still glowed with quiet fire. On the table beside her sat a letter addressed to Maya Torres. "Maya. If you're reading this, I've gone where the flames can't reach. Don't grieve, not for long. Fire was my teacher, and silence my companion. You were my proof that legacy isn't what we leave behind, but who carries it forward. Keep teaching them. Keep fighting the right battles. And when the world grows too loud, don't be afraid of the quiet, that's where truth hides. With love and pride, always. Clara." At her memorial, thousands gathered, firefighters, leaders, children, and strangers whose lives she'd touched without ever meeting. Maya gave the eulogy. "Clara Hayes taught us that heroism doesn't shout. It listens. It endures. It acts. She walked through fire so the rest of us could learn how to face our own." Behind her, a large portrait of Clara hung beneath the Academy emblem, her faint smile eternal, her eyes alive with calm defiance. Maya paused, then read Clara's final line from her book aloud. "Fire destroys, yes, but it also clears the ground for new things to grow." The crowd stood in silence, not out of grief, but respect. Outside, the Academy's bell rang 12 times. With each toll, Maya felt the weight of her mentor's legacy settle not as a burden, but as a blessing. When the final chime faded, a breeze swept through the courtyard, gentle but warm, almost like a breath. Maya smiled. "Rest easy, Dr. Hayes. We'll keep the flame burning." And somewhere, beyond smoke and silence, Clara Hayes smiled too, her voice now eternal, carried in every heartbeat that dared to rise again after the fire. 10 years had passed since the memorial of Dr. Clara Hayes, and yet her name was spoken daily, not in grief, but in gratitude. The Phoenix Initiative had become more than an organization, it was a movement that had rippled across continents. Every major city now had a Phoenix Center, hubs for emergency response, survivor recovery, and mental resilience. On the wall of every center hung her words, engraved in steel. You are not your mistakes. You are what you do after them. Maya Torres had become the face of that movement. Once the protege, now the leader, she carried Clara's legacy with quiet strength. She never tried to replace her mentor, no one could, but she built upon her foundation, modernizing training methods, establishing global partnerships, and ensuring that the lessons of courage and humility lived beyond one generation. This morning, as the sun rose over New York City, Maya stood on the rooftop of the new Phoenix International Headquarters, a structure of glass and light built on the old Fire Academy's grounds. From here, she could see the skyline shimmering, the city alive and unbroken. She closed her eyes, feeling the soft wind on her face, and whispered the words she always said before each new day began. For you, Clara. Downstairs, the building buzzed with activity. Trainees from around the world filled the auditorium, over 200 men and women in fresh uniforms, their faces marked by hope and nerves. The opening ceremony for the International Fire and Resilience Summit was moments away. As Maya walked through the halls, her steps echoed on the polished marble floors. Banners lined the corridor, courage in silence, strength in service, the phoenix never falls. Each one bore Clara's image, captured in that iconic photo from the Ridgeview rescue, soot-covered, exhausted, yet defiant. When Maya reached the stage, the hall erupted in applause. She nodded in acknowledgement but raised a hand gently, signaling quiet. We begin today not as individuals, she said, her voice steady, but as a collective flame. 15 years ago, one woman reminded us that even when everything burns, something inside us still endures. She paused, letting the silence stretch, the kind Clara had always commanded so naturally. I was a student when I met her. I thought strength was about never falling. She taught me it's about standing again, even when you've been burned. The audience hung on every word. Clara Hayes wasn't perfect. She never pretended to be. But she was honest, relentless, and kind, the kind of person who walks through fire not to prove they're brave, but to make sure no one gets left behind. Applause thundered again, filling the hall like wind feeding a flame. After the speech, Maya stepped backstage, her heart still pounding. She had given dozens of addresses in her career, but speaking of Clara always felt different, as if her mentor stood somewhere just beyond the light, nodding with that same quiet approval. She found herself in the Foundation archive room, her favorite place in the entire building. Rows of glass cases held relics from Clara's life, the charred firefighter's helmet from Brooklyn 17, the burnt apron from Le Rêve, the black dress she wore at the first Phoenix Gala, and Elliot Vance's handwritten letters, sealed in frames. At the center stood a bronze statue of Clara, her expression soft yet determined, holding a lantern, symbolizing guidance through darkness. Maya stood before it for a long moment. You'd hate this statue, she murmured, smiling faintly. Too dramatic. Too polished. You'd probably say, where's the soot? Her voice softened. But you'd love what it stands for. Later that afternoon, Maya attended a small private ceremony at the old memorial site, a yearly ritual known as the Renewal Fire. Survivors, firefighters, and families gathered around a controlled flame that burned in a steel bowl, representing rebirth through destruction. Each year, someone new was chosen to rekindle it, to remind the world that courage never dies. This year, Maya had chosen someone unexpected, a 12-year-old girl named Lila Bennett. Her father, a firefighter, had lost his life during a rescue the previous winter. Lila had written to the Phoenix Initiative months ago, saying she wanted to be brave like the lady who never stopped saving people. When Lila stepped forward, holding the torch with trembling hands, the entire crowd went still. Maya knelt beside her, guiding her as she lit the flame. The fire came to life, soft at first, then strong and steady. The wind caught it, making it dance. Why do we do this every year? Lila asked softly. Maya smiled. Because fire took a lot from us. But it also gave us light. Dr. Hayes used to say the trick isn't fearing fire, it's learning to walk beside it. Lila nodded, eyes wide. Was she scared? Always, Maya said. That's what made her brave. As evening fell, the city glowed gold beneath the horizon. Maya returned to her office, weary but content. She sat at her desk, where an old wooden box rested, Clara's personal keepsake, passed down after her death. Maya rarely opened it, but tonight felt right. Inside were simple things, a locket, a folded napkin with Elliot's handwriting, a piece of charred glass from Lorev, and a sealed envelope addressed to whoever carries the flame next. Maya hesitated, then opened it. If you're reading this, it means you've taken my place in the story, not to repeat it, but to continue it. I've learned that the world doesn't need louder heroes. It needs quieter ones, the kind who listen before they act, who choose mercy over recognition. Don't chase perfection. Perfection doesn't rebuild anything. Compassion does. And when your fire begins to fade, because it will, remember, someone else will carry it. That's how we survive the ashes. Keep walking forward, even if the smoke blinds you for a while. You'll find your way by the light you leave behind. Clara. Maya folded the letter carefully, tears glistening in her eyes. For years, she had sought to honor her mentor's legacy. Now she realized she wasn't just honoring it, she was living it. She placed the letter back in the box, then turned to the window. Below, the city shimmered with 1,000 lights. Every one of them, she thought, was a flame someone refused to let die. The next day brought new challenges, it always did. Fires still burned. Floods still struck. The world didn't pause for legacy. But that was how Clara would have wanted it. The Phoenix Initiative's teams deployed across the globe, from California wildfires to Southeast Asian floods, all trained in Clara's methods. They called it, the Hays Code, 3 principles written on every mission briefing. Listen before you lead. Fear is not failure. No one burns alone. These weren't just slogans, they were doctrine. And every time a responder risked their life to save another, Clara's spirit was there, unspoken but felt. Months later, during a summit in Tokyo, Maya met an older woman who approached her after a panel. She carried a worn copy of Walking Through Fire. You don't know me, the woman said softly, but I lost my son in a factory fire 15 years ago. I almost didn't survive it. Then I found this book. Dr. Hayes's story saved me. Maya took the woman's hands gently. She'd be glad to hear that. The woman smiled. I think she knows. That night, Maya walked through the city alone, her mind full of ghosts and gratitude. The air was warm, the lights soft. At a small riverside park, she saw a street performer juggling torches. The firelight flickered across his face, reflected in the water below. Children clapped and cheered, their laughter echoing through the night. It struck her, how natural fire was. Dangerous, yes, but also beautiful. Humanity's oldest friend and oldest fear. Clara had understood that duality better than anyone. She had spent her life teaching people not to destroy fire, but to respect it. Maya sat on a nearby bench, pulling her phone from her coat pocket. She opened her notes app and began typing, unsure what she was writing until the words filled the screen. The fire never dies. It only changes hands. Some of us fight it, some of us flee it. But the bravest of us learn to carry it, carefully, with love. Because in the end, the world needs both light and warmth. And sometimes, that means being the spark. She saved the note, smiled to herself, and looked up at the city again. The skyline burned orange in the distance, not with destruction, but with sunrise. Years later, when Maya's own hair turned silver, she would often sit with young trainees and tell them stories about her mentor. Dr. Hayes didn't teach me how to fight fire, she'd say. She taught me how to face it without losing myself. And when they'd ask what Clara was really like, Maya would pause, as if searching for the right words, then say, she was quiet. But when she spoke, the world listened. Final scene, 25 years later. The Phoenix International Headquarters was now an architectural marvel of steel and glass, powered by sustainable energy, crowned by a golden emblem shaped like wings. It was the 25th anniversary of the initiative, and a new generation filled the courtyard, young, fearless, ready to serve. At the center of the courtyard stood 2 statues now, Clara Hayes with her lantern, and beside her, Elliot Vance holding a blueprint, smiling toward her direction. Between them burned the eternal flame, the heart of the Phoenix movement. Maya, now retired, watched from a distance. The ceremony had begun without her, led by the new director, a woman named Lila Bennett. The same child who had once rekindled the renewal fire years ago. Lila stood before the crowd, her voice clear and bright. Dr. Hayes taught us that fire isn't our enemy. It's our mirror. It shows us who we are when everything else is gone. She turned toward the flame. Today, we honor her not with silence, but with promise, that as long as one person dares to rise again, the fire lives on. She struck the ceremonial torch against the stone and lit the eternal flame anew. The crowd applauded as the fire blazed brighter than ever. Maya felt tears sting her eyes. She whispered, "You did it, Clara. You really did." The wind carried her words upward. For a fleeting second, she could almost hear Clara's voice in reply, calm, certain, unshaken. The fire was never mine to keep. Only to pass on. The flame flickered, as if answering. The crowd below cheered. The phoenix soared higher, its wings spread across the hearts of generations to come. And above it all, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, the city glowed like one vast ember, alive, eternal, unafraid. The flame never dies.